are these people?
We could get to reading the article that Whitney published about Les Wexner and Ohio, because it's fascinating. I went through it, and I want to go through it here, because I think a lot of people skim it, or they don't necessarily read through it, and we're going to read through it. Yes, Angel Israel is doing the Greater Israel Project, and nobody seems to be stopping them, and that's the problem. All right, Technate, Ohio. How Leslie Wexner and Jeffrey Epstein built the Silicon Heartland. Okay, so this is the blueprint that lays out where all these different companies are in relation to, I believe one of these is his compound. Okay, but where all these different tech companies are located now, at least have an office. Ohio has become the new destination for big tech data centers and AI infrastructure. The state owes much of its rapid transformation to the so-called Silicon Heartland, to the now vast array of public-private partnerships pioneered by the state's richest man, Leslie Wexner, and his former money manager and fixer, we know his name, Jeffrey Epstein. And this is by Whitney and by Mark Goodwin. Also, don't want to forget to mention Mark. They co-wrote this together. So I'm gonna start. Let's blow this up a little bit so everybody can read it with me. That early last year, shortly after Trump took office for his second term, former presidential candidate, we know this guy, Vivek Ramaswamy, announced that he was departing the recently formed Department of Government Efficiency. Remember, he was number 2 at Doge underneath Elon. All right, after reports of conflict with the department's co-head, Elon Musk. Vivek joined Fox News to clarify these rumors and to tease his next endeavor, holding public office. And he ran for governor, I believe. Vivek noted Musk's approach was a technology approach, whereas his was focused more on constitutional law, legislative-based approach. Okay, whatever that meant. But he further explained that when you're talking about constitutional revival, it's not just done through the federal government, it's done through federalism, where states also lead the way. Okay. Despite their differences, Ramaswamy importantly remarked that they were both on the same page, sure they are, and that their attempts in saving the country required them to divide and conquer. Okay, so that's his excuse to say, look, I'm going to leave, I'm going to go do the state thing because there's plenty of room out there for all of us to do our thing, and he'll make plenty of money. And remember, he's already made millions doing basically nothing. Okay? Himbo, you lie. All right? You do not live in Ohio, sir. All right? Descent in Blue does live in Ohio. That's funny. All right. Toward the end of the interview, Vivek mentioned that he was flying back to Ohio that week with an announcement regarding his expressed intention of pushing for reform at the state level, coming shortly. The former presidential hopeful explained that when we look at the country over the last 20 years, he's such a slimeball. He tries to be Caramel Obama in so many ways, but for the right. All right. Over the last 20 years, Silicon Valley was at the bleeding edge of the American economy. I think the Ohio River Valley can be at the bleeding edge of the American economy for the next 20 years. A few weeks later, Vivek's gubernatorial campaign for Ohio was announced, and the former Doge co-head was promptly endorsed by Trump. Over the course of that campaign, Vivek's fortunes have quite literally soared. What a shock. Since launching, he's not only come to command a massive campaign war chest filled by deep-pocketed donors, but his own net worth has doubled. And again, anywhere you see an underline here, there's a receipt to some link somewhere. Now, in this case, his doubled net worth goes to a Forbes article that talks about that. All right, the campaign war chest is from notus.org. The thing from a few weeks later is from the BBC. So a lot of this stuff is sourced. While many once labeled this campaign as a clear demotion for Vivek, the reality of an emerging Ohio, specifically as it relates to the technocratic goals of the Trump admin and its donors, most importantly, paints a very different picture. As noted in Ian Davis's book, The Technocratic Dark State, which, by the way, is published, I believe, by Whitney and Mark's publishing company, Doge, which is the agency that Ramaswamy co-led, is part of a larger effort led largely by a small group of the ultra-wealthy to completely privatize the public sector in the name of greater efficiency and have it ruled by techno kings or dictator CEOs. This is like, what's the thing in Ecuador, the Prospera that they're trying to build. All right, I'm sure she'll get to Prospera at some point. Ian Davis frames this as a modern iteration of technocracy, bolstered by tech billionaires with close ties to the Trump admin, such as Musk and the evil snake reptile Peter Thiel. The reptile, by the way, is an anagram for his name, Peter Thiel. Not saying, just saying. Thiel is the longtime benefactor of Ohio Congressman and current Vice President J.D. Vance. Steve Poikonen refers to him as J.D. Vance as Peter Thiel's golf glove. Notably, Ohio's richest man, Leslie Wexner, of course, I'll say, okay, along with help from the infamous Jeffrey Epstein, a Thiel associate, has spent decades creating partnerships where private interests, including those he directly controls, dominate its state and local governments. In some cases, such as the Columbus suburb of New Albany, they've completely replaced them. All right. Quietly over the last decade, Ohio has become a state of incredible national importance as it continues to attract data centers from American royalty, quote unquote, and big tech stalwarts into its friendly regulatory borders. But long before Amazon, Meta, Anduril, which, by the way, just finished a plant 3 months early, Microsoft, and others took their power hungry and literally and figuratively, how much juice they suck up, she'll probably mention that too, refuge in the Buckeye State. The most well-known financier of Jeffrey Epstein, Leslie Wexner, and his extensive crime-linked network were laying the foundation for the new Silicon Valley, now known as the Silicon Heartland, along the Ohio River. That's where they're getting the water that they need. Wexner's own statements last year underscore Ohio's coming importance in the age of ascendant AI-powered technocracy. Last May, he stated that Columbus in particular would soon become an international AI destination. He also asserted that probably the largest AI investment in the world will happen in Columbus. Wexner would know, as he's personally responsible for Ohio's, or specifically Columbus's, rise as one of the most important AI hubs in the country. Yet, Wexner, with Epstein's help, has done much more than attract massive AI data centers to the state. As this investigation is going to show, Wexner and his closest allies, Epstein among them, but much more than just Epstein, worked to create a model for the takeover of local governments via these public-private partnerships, starting first in New Albany, beginning in the late 1980s. It's since spread to cover the entire state of Ohio via a network of public-private partnerships that Wexner helped create. How convenient. This system has allowed Wexner to use billions of dollars of Ohio taxpayer money with little to no public scrutiny to finance what can only be described as a massive welfare system for corporations. Among that system's current biggest beneficiaries are, naturally, Wexner's New Albany company. So he's paying himself back for all the investment and all the time and all the connections, as well as massive big tech corporations with important ties to Epstein, like Amazon and Google. Sure. Also multi-trillion-dollar corporations. Meanwhile, regular Ohioans are seeing their power bills jump, provoking an affordability crisis in the state, while funding for public schools, libraries, and healthcare is cut dramatically. Go figure. All to keep the corporate welfare engine designed by Wexner running full tilt. And the money is only funneling really one way. So here she gets into how he helped build New Albany. The New Albany Company was founded in 1986 by none other than Leslie Wexner, Ohio's wealthiest man, and his longtime associate, John, or they call him Jack, Kessler. The company was initially housed at the same address as other WEXNERLAND companies on the 37th floor of Columbus's Huntington Center. Their landlord, Gerald Hines, was a Houston-based real estate developer and chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas from 1981 to 1983. I'm sure that's going to become significant. As noted in her book, One Nation Under Blackmail, which you should have already on your shelves, Hines' real estate and other interests were enmeshed with those of the Bush family, as they're from Houston, as well as arms trafficker Adnan Khashoggi, an early client of and alleged mentor to Jeffrey Epstein during the 1980s. Yes, father of the one and only Jamal Khashoggi. According to the Cleveland Plain Dealer, the decision to create New Albany took place when Kessler and Wexner were cruising in Les's Land Rover near New Albany. The pair saw acre after acre of empty farmland, and thus the billionaire, getting a vision thing, declared to his buddy, "This will be my new home." That same report also declared that the pair, after forming the New Albany Company, quote, spun off a bunch of paper corporations to cover their footprints. Then their minions knocked on doors and made the proverbial offers that you couldn't refuse. What was once the village of New Albany is now a, again, unique public-private partnership between the New Albany Company, a private company, and the city of New Albany, the local government. Kessler told Columbus CEO in 2014, that's a magazine, that the New Albany Company has always had a very close working relationship with the city, whose leaders are very pro-development as a result. I'm guessing that the candidates that run for council in New Albany are probably people that he supports and funds. The New Albany Company, soon after its creation, developed a master plan for the town's growth and aesthetics that has been strictly adhered to since its founding. As with most public-private partnerships, the public sector in New Albany is largely subservient to its private partner, which of course is for profit, naturally. Wexner and Kessler may have wanted to exert such extensive control over this influential Columbus suburb for other reasons, too. And why would that be? Shortly before the New Albany Company was created, both Wexner and Kessler found themselves under investigation for ties to the mob-style murder of Arthur Shapiro, who was due to testify to the IRS just days after his murder. Go figure. That's a weird coincidence. Shapiro had been the lawyer for Wexner's company, The Limited, and was involved in its finances. So, one way to ensure that he would be unable to testify under oath would be to somehow arrange for or be involved with or somehow something involved with a mob-style murder, which is what is being insinuated here. He was murdered via mob-style murder. Whether Wexner was connected is alleged and unknown. In investigating Shapiro's death, there was some conjecture that Shapiro was in a position to provide information to the IRS grand jury that would have been damaging to some other party. I can't imagine who. Columbus police then determined that Wexner was enmeshed with organized crime interests. Oh boy, that's a bad thing. However, of course, the investigation into Wexner and any linkages to organized crime were halted, and the police documentation from that investigation were heavily suppressed by the Columbus chief of police at the time, James Jackson. Sure, because they're going to start to control all of it. When the documents later became accidentally public via FOIA request, Jackson was surprised and remarked that, "I thought I got rid of it," with respect to the documents in question. Oops. Sorry about that. Wouldn't getting rid of it actually constitute a crime? So, all right. Those documents will be referred to as the Shapiro murder file for the remainder of this article. Okay. So here's an article that she had written about the Arthur Shapiro homicide from beforehand. Okay. By the late 80s, Epstein, who then had crept into Wexner's inner circle, had become a general partner in New Albany's real estate holding company, New Albany Property. I wonder how that happened, and had to put at least a few $1 million into the project himself. Former state of Ohio inspector David Sturtz reportedly claimed that Epstein was Shapiro's replacement. In addition, local Ohio reporter Bob Fitrakis told New York Magazine in 2002 that Epstein had been a crucial part of the New Albany project, which I don't think is much of a surprise. But before Epstein came along in 1988, the financial preparations and groundwork for the New Albany development were a total mess. Epstein cleaned everything up, as well as serving Wexner in other capacities. Petrakis also stated that New Albany's success had required significant changes to be made to the Columbus city policy as well as zoning laws. As attested to in the Shapiro murder file, this appears to have been accomplished by questionable investments made by a Wexner-controlled entity in a jazz club run by former city council member Jeremy Hammond. I know that name, unless it's just a coincidence. Alongside his successor on the council, Les Wright. There's going to be a lot of names that we're going to talk here. It might get a little confusing, but hopefully we'll be able to pull it all back together. The file also details circumstantial evidence that Hammond was able to make payments on luxury assets and goods well above his salary, which was suggestive of bribes. Of course there would be. That's kind of how mob tactics work if you're going to use them. As luck would have it for Les Wexner, Hammond became swept up in an emotional debate about the Wexley luxury housing project, which was a reference to the New Albany project in 1988, and was accused of selling out the city's and public's interests for Wexner's benefit, because it was true. New Albany, thanks in large part to Hammond and Wright, was able to secure its desired changes to local policy. Of course they were, because that's where money talks, and that's unfortunately in the end usually what happens. However, the accusations that New Albany's projects and ambitions were acting in defiance of existing state and local laws would continue for years. All right, and this is 8 pages of this investigation, including a diagram laying out how all these people link together. All right. And again, I'm reading the Whitney Webb and Mark Goodwin piece from Unlimited Hangout. Go read this yourself at unlimitedhangout.com. Totally free. Subscribe monthly. It's $5 a month. Support independent media. In 1990, Epstein acquired property in New Albany via a Wexner-controlled trust, with the house being widely reported as a gift from Wexner to Epstein. Epstein resigned from the trust and bought the home, which he owned from 1994 until 2007, when he and Wexner publicly cut ties after Epstein's first arrest that same year. That's when he went to prison in Florida. However, recent releases have shown the two men stayed in contact for years after. And that's what the Epstein files are showing she's talking about. Epstein subsequently sold the house in New Albany back to the Wexners that year for a reported $0. Makes sense since he was gifted the house in the first place. That way they pay no property taxes and they just go back and forth with it. In 1992, Epstein obtained another property in New Albany, this time via a trust linked to the other partner, John Kessler. Former Epstein employee Maria Farmer filed a lawsuit alleging that she was attacked by Epstein at the property in 1996 and that Wexner's security prevented her from leaving the home for close to 12 hours. A Washington Post report confirmed that Wexner's security team monitored the home when Epstein owned it. Epstein then sold this property in 1998 to a company called HHD&B LLC, which has the same mailing address as the New Albany company, suggesting again that they were connected. How much did he sell that for, I wonder? That same year, Epstein was listed as co-president alongside Leslie Wexner of New Albany Company. So now what happened to John Kessler by 1998? Interesting. Beginning in the early 90s, Epstein was also president of the New Albany-based NA Property Inc., which early records also refer to as part of the Wexner Investment Company. Later records show that it also had used the name of the New Albany Investment Company as well as New Albany Investments. So they're using different variations of the name to create different holding companies that have completely different tax ID numbers and operate theoretically completely separate from each other, even though they're all technically linked. This is shell companies and holding companies, etc. The Wexner Foundation later referred to Epstein's role as president at NA Property as being one of his Wexner-related roles, because when they have all these shell companies, somebody's got to be an officer or a secretary or somebody as part of a board member for some nonsense. Okay? Though the Wexner Foundation claims that Epstein resigned from that role in 2007, he wasn't technically removed as the company agent until 2008, while he's going through trial and about to go to prison. Despite Wexner's previous claims that Epstein stole his money and that they had broken off all association the year prior, again, recent releases have shown that Wexner was still in communication with Epstein during that time. And they were still doing business. He wasn't just like, hey, where's my money? According to a 2002 New York Magazine profile, that's before 2007, obviously, Epstein maintained a branch of his financial advisory firm in New Albany. This article notes that, or the article she's referencing in New York Magazine notes that Epstein's presence in the Columbus suburb was incredibly strong in 2002, and that Epstein's staff for his financial advisory firm were spread between Manhattan, New Albany, and Little St. James / Big Great St. James in the U.S. Virgin Islands. The report notes that he had reincorporated this company as Financial Trust Co., based in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Financial Trust Co. and its successor, Southern Trust, were alleged by USVI authorities to have served as cover for Epstein's illicit activities. Southern Airlines. Southern Trust later became intimately involved with the use of AI in financial markets, with goals to expand into healthcare, like maybe what a techno, what do you want to call that? Transhumanism. That's the word I'm thinking of. It's unknown how long Epstein's Financial Trust Co. and its precursor maintained its New Albany branch, though it's likely related to the aforementioned NA Property / New Albany Investment Company. It's just a matter of which shell they decided to hide it under, right? Which, as noted above, which was also an entity connected directly to Wexner. So, like, it doesn't really matter because it all ends up flowing upwards to one person. And it's this guy through this guy. You know this guy, right? All right, and that's his wife, Abigail Wexner, by the way, in the middle. In the years that followed Epstein's supposed break from Wexner, records show that Gary Kearney, the former CEO of the New Albany Company Limited Partnership, yet another shell company, managed multiple Epstein properties. So it's very incestuous, where they all know and trust each other and are managing multiple companies and shells and wear different roles and hats and can hide there. The two men had met in New Albany via their roles at the New Albany Company. So effectively, I'm sorry. Yeah. So Gary Kearney was the former CEO of New Albany Limited Partnership, managed New Albany properties, Epstein properties including the ones in New Mexico. We talked about that one, that's Zorro Ranch, and the USVI, that would be Epstein Island, or the Little Great St. James and Little St. James. So the two men had met in New Albany via their roles at the company. Kearney started managing properties for Epstein at least as early as 1999. Roughly a decade later, in 2009, Kearney recruited Stephen Kaplinger, the former New Albany Director of Planning and Design, to help Epstein further develop Little St. James, the infamous island in the Virgin Islands. That same year, Kearney was listed as the island's construction manager and was one of 4 people, including Epstein himself, that had an affiliated credit card. So he clearly was well trusted. According to reports by 2010, Kearney was making roughly $368,000 in change per year between his salary, housing stipend, and travel costs. This would then make him Epstein's second highest paid employee at the time. Kearney wasn't the island's only long-term connection to New Albany either, as the island was insured by the New Albany-based insurance office, Central Ohio, through at least March 2019. Epstein's extensive ties to New Albany, as detailed above, lend credence to Ghislaine Maxwell's more recent statements to Todd Blanche, the current Deputy Attorney General, that Epstein ran New Albany for much of the time she was affiliated with him, despite Wexner's repeated downplaying of this role. So here we go, how we get from Silicon Valley to the Silicon Heartland. How do you get all of these Silicon Valley guys to want to build in the middle of nowhere in New Albany, Ohio? Sorry, dissent, but that's where it is. All right. In the decades after Wexner, Kessler, and Epstein first dug in, New Albany has since emerged as the premier locale in the United States for the booming data center industry. In 2014, the first notable data center moved into the Ohio River Valley, with Compass Data Centers spending $60 million to place 5 data centers on a 9.2-acre parcel of land within New Albany Business Park. The New Albany Business Park is especially relevant to Wexner, as it's also owned by his New Albany company. It's also home to Wexner-linked corporate data centers, including his Abercrombie and Fitch. Shortly after Compass Data Centers joined the neighborhood, Amazon Web Services was built 3 campuses in New Albany, followed by Meta, then they were still called Facebook at the time, and Google, now called Alphabet, each adding a campus in New Albany. So now there's like a gold rush. It's monkey see, monkey do in the tech industry, as our friend Kelly Albertine will tell you. Compass Data Centers expanded their operations into Canada and, of course, Israel in 2019. Fuck Israel. With the latter coming to fruition through a partnership with Amazon Web Services after the Azrieli Group purchased a 20% stake in the company. The Azrieli Group was founded by Israeli-Canadian tycoon David Azrieli and went on to become the largest IPO ever on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange in 2010. It has since grown into Israel's largest commercial real estate developer. I wonder how they feel about return to office policy. I'll bet I know. The Azrieli Group is a known partner of another Canadian family dynasty, the Bronfmans, who boast significant ties to both Wexner and Epstein and have been alleged to be involved in a lot of illicit operations. As it stands today, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and Meta all have data centers or commitments to build data centers within New Albany, Ohio. It's almost like they're buying off their, favor with somebody or something, allegedly. In addition to the data centers, Central Ohio has also welcomed a commitment from Intel to build one of the largest semiconductor factories in the world. This decision was made in no small part due to the state offering nearly $2 billion in incentives and tax breaks for the California-based Intel, including a 30-year tax break approved by state legislators, allowing Intel to save $650 million on the backs of tax-paying Ohioans, by the way. In February of 2026, just last month, Intel announced delays until 2030 regarding this project. Of course. New Albany executives have described the Intel deal and the influx of big tech data centers as necessary to establish the Silicon Heartland in Ohio with New Albany at its center. They're also going to drain the Ohio River, would be my guess, but that's my prediction. So here is a map of all the different development and all the size of the locations. And there you've got Amgen. That's a biotech stock. And there's his Abercrombie and Fitch, Voyant, and Reiki, and Lukta, Cupertino Electric, Cyrus One. You've got a lot of organizations beyond just the ones that we mentioned. L Brands, that's another Wexner organization. Hims, they're like they send out Viagra style pills, pharmaceuticals to cover a certain problem. So again, I'm reading Whitney Webb and Mark Goodwin's article about Central Ohio, New Albany, and the tech center that's being built there and how it happened. So you can go read this again over at unlimitedhangout.com. Incidentally, Wexner and the New Albany company played an intimate role in helping seal the Intel deal in Ohio. Again, not really incidentally. I think that's tongue-in-cheek. It was representatives of the New Albany company who approached the once quiet town of Johnstown, offering to pay up front for hundreds of acres in and around town. They paid well over market rate, and many sold their properties for over $1 million, though they had to sign non-disclosure agreements with the New Albany company to lock in those prices. I wonder how Whitney got that info. I guess it's public record. A few months after these deals were finalized, it was announced that Intel was planning to build its new semiconductor factories in that exact area. It, meaning the Intel deal, wouldn't have happened without them, said the CEO of Jobs Ohio, the state's private economic development group. All right. Look, pay attention to that organization and keep your eyes on that. Jobs Ohio, incidentally, had secured a $150 million grant that paid for the land for the Intel facilities, which formed part of an incentive package from the state of Ohio, totaling that over $2 billion. So the state gave it through this organization. I'm sure they took their cut off the top because they usually do. Jobs Ohio is a controversial dark money organization, and that's discussed in a detail later. We'll discuss that in detail later, which is good. Told you we're already 40 minutes in. We might have to break this up into two, but we'll get there. Like other tax incentives prepared by the state to benefit Wexner connected business deals, Ohioans are unlikely to reap any of the alleged benefits that they'll receive. Indeed, with New Albany's data center growth long promoted as essential to the economic well-being of state residents, most Ohioans have instead received only engorged electricity bills so far, despite the billions in taxpayer-funded incentives that these large tech conglomerates have received. Yeah, but that yes, and they're still going to pass that on to the consumers because they're going to drain the data center, they're going to drain the power plants. While Ohioans are turning out in record numbers to oppose building even more data centers, Ohio state legislators have responded by introducing legislations to create a new commission that would help dispel inaccurate myths about bringing more data centers into the state. Particularly, data centers planned to be built on land developed by, guess who? Leslie Wexner and Jeffrey Epstein's, and that was the state's New Albany company, because I'm sure that his estate still retains ownership in that organization. Some of those shell companies, those holding companies. In addition to Wexner's direct ties to bringing big tech giants to New Albany, there is also an important possibility that Epstein himself helped sow the seeds for their presence in the Wexner-dominated Columbus suburb as well. For instance, during the time that Epstein was intimately involved with New Albany and allegedly ran it for Wexner, he was the main and some years the only donor to the Edge Foundation. The Edge Foundation, beginning in 1999, was the host of the influential Billionaires Dinner, in which Epstein was involved from its inception. Sounds like he created it specifically for this. From 2001 to 2017, overlapping several years with Epstein's deep involvement in New Albany, Epstein funded over $600,000 out of the total of $857,000 raised by Edge during that period. That's like 3/4 of the money. Subsequent reports have alleged that Edge's billionaire dinner was an influence operation run for Epstein's benefit, which would make a lot of sense. Notable attendees of these dinners at the time that Epstein was Edge's most influential donor include several of the founders of major big tech companies that installed themselves at New Albany during and shortly after that period of time. These founders include Jeff Bezos of Amazon and Google co-founders Sergey Brin and Larry Page. Again, all with CIA contracts. Bezos developed close ties to Epstein's fixer, Ghislaine Maxwell, while Brin and Page were both subpoenaed as part of the Virgin Islands case against J.P. Morgan regarding the bank's alleged facilitation of Epstein's sex trafficking activities. Alleged. These subpoenas were issued because Epstein allegedly led the Google co-founders to bank with J.P. Morgan, and Epstein helped advise Brin on structuring trusts for his children. Well, that's pretty interesting. I believe this might be the billionaires dinner that's being discussed. This is an image released from the Epstein files from a 2015 dinner hosted by Reid Hoffman and Peter Thiel, which Epstein attended. And I see Elon Musk there. That looks like Sundar Pichai, maybe from Google, from Microsoft. There's Zuckerberg right there. There's the robot, and Priscilla Chan, his wife. I don't know who that is off the top of my head, nor that. Anyway, in addition, Epstein attended a 2015 dinner meeting brokered by Reid Hoffman and Peter Thiel, which you just saw the picture above, where Zuckerberg of Meta, Facebook, was in attendance. Thiel was considerably close to Epstein during this time and beyond, and was also an extremely influential early investor in and board member of Meta and Facebook. That was actually documented in the movie The Social Network. Thiel's Epstein ties, combined with Zuckerberg's own meeting with Epstein, could have played a role in Meta's decision to establish a presence in Wexner-dominated New Albany in 2017. So basically, if Thiel told Zuckerberg, who at that point had already become insanely wealthy, that he should build a data center in New Albany, Zuckerberg's going to listen. Last year, Meta announced that they would build yet another data center, promoted as the highest capacity data center in the world in Wexner's fiefdom. Guess who's getting paid rent on all this property? Guess who's getting a share of the property taxes because of the New Albany Corporation? I think we're going to talk about that now. So this is how he designed the Ohio corporate welfare system funded by the taxpayers. So he's funneling these grants, which are out there and legal, but the question is, how did they get on the ballot and how did they get allowed and issued in the first place? The question thus remains, why Central Ohio? New Albany was hardly a formidable city before Wexner and Epstein located their business dealings there, with a population of just over 1,500 citizens in 1990. It was small. By 2000, it had grown to just over 4,000. That's more than doubling in 10 years. That's significant growth. And since then has seen 180% growth, leaving the small but powerful suburb of Columbus sitting at a population of around 11,000 people today. New Albany, yeah, that's a pretty substantial sized town at 11,000. Reporting from Data Center Frontier in 2024 speculates as to why this region was chosen to house so many data centers. Historically, this parallel was of systemic importance to the Union Pacific Railroad system and fiber providers such as AT&T, Verizon, Comcast, and more, which all ran their broadband cables alongside the rails of the first transcontinental railroad. According to a LinkedIn post by current Oracle employee and former program manager of Microsoft's Cloud Developer Services, George Moore, this fiber optic infrastructure provides the data centers with unprecedented access to the absolute highest bandwidth in a virtuous cycle of investment. More data centers drive more traffic, which drives more fiber optic cables, which drives more data centers. It becomes this vicious cycle. And of course, the data centers are eating up power and water and resources. Not to remain a speculative theory, this flywheel of data center buildouts pushed by fiber optic growth, as described by Moore, has driven Ohio to become a leading state for data centers. According to reports from datacentermap.com, Ohio is currently home to 193 data centers, making it just the fourth-ranked state in the country, behind Virginia, Texas, and California, which are, in two cases, much larger states than Ohio, obviously, by land. Ohio now boasts more data centers than its neighboring states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Indiana combined. Well, over half of those data centers are situated in, well over half are situated in central Ohio, with 121 and counting just in the Columbus, New Albany area alone. They decided to have everyone build there so that they could profit from it. And that's what we're going to figure out how they did it. Unsurprisingly, the New Albany company views itself as being central to Ohio's transformation. And are they using this? Are they going to try to use this as a model to expand out into more of Ohio? For instance, the company's current CEO, Bill Ebbing, told Forbes that, quote, the establishment of the Silicon Heartland in New Albany will redefine Ohio's economic future, providing generational job opportunities while helping to reduce the country's dependence on foreign manufacturing of semiconductors, referencing the Intel planned New Albany-based plant that's now been delayed, by the way, till at least 2030, while they already are reaping massive tax benefits. As a result of New Albany's efforts, Ohio has now taken center stage as the hub of the Midwest Semiconductor Network, or the MSN. That network is notably led by Ohio State University, which of course naturally is deeply connected to one and only Les Wexner and fueled by federal investment through the Biden-era CHIPS and Science Act. Public-private partnership. God, fuck these guys. Like I said, Biden was red, Trump was blue, Trump is red, Biden. They have the same policies. They support the same people. It isn't just federal taxpayer funds that are fueling the construction of the Silicon Heartland, right where Wexner conveniently wields such power. All right. Another reason for Ohio becoming the epicenter for data centers is because of the unprecedented ways in which Ohio's private sector, led of course by Wexner-led entities, has been able to divert Ohio taxpayer funds to heavily subsidize the development of the state's Silicon Heartland. So here we go with this development company. After remaking what was once the village of New Albany into a public-private partnership under his control, Wexner turned his sights to the far larger neighboring city of Columbus, the Ohio state capital. In 2002, Wexner and Kessler teamed up with the longtime publisher on the Columbus Dispatch, John Wolfe, to create the Columbus Partnership. It's worth noting that Wolfe was very enmeshed with Wexner, serving on the board of the Wexner Center Foundation from 1990 to 2016. Wexner then chaired the Columbus Partnership for nearly 20 years and stepped down in 2021. He's now basically stepped back mostly from private life. He's also like 90. He's not that old, but he's pretty damn old. The partnership describes itself as a nonprofit organization of CEOs from Columbus's leading businesses and institutions. But in reality, it is the de facto economic development authority for the Columbus region, which includes 11 counties in and around the city. How did they get that? In fact, when the Columbus Partnership created Columbus 2020, which later became One Columbus, which is now the official economic development group of the entire Columbus region. One Columbus is also, conveniently, a public-private partnership largely funded by private corporations with significant presence in Ohio, including a lot of businesses that guess who recruited to be there. JP Morgan and Honda and AT&T and Bank of America, and of course, L Brands, the Wexner-controlled parent company of the Limited. This guy feels like Mr. Burns in every way, shape, and form. Several of its current investors are the big tech firms like Amazon, who've become deeply entrenched in Wexner's New Albany. One Columbus also developed the local government's current economic roadmap, which is aggressively focused on economic growth benefiting its corporate partnerships. Remember, profits over people all the time. One Columbus's partnership with local governments in the area has allowed them to offer the companies that they court, many of which are foreign-owned, large incentive packages that are funded by public money. Several of the businesses they court moved to New Albany. These companies are attracted by these generous taxpayer-funded incentives, then purchase commercial real estate, most often from, how convenient, Wexner's New Albany company, which he then turns a healthy profit for. And then his company's going to collect fees and taxes and profit from having a sanitation service and everything else. Let's see what else he provides. The use of over-the-top incentives for corporate relocation to Columbus has been engineered by Wexner many times in the past, such as in the Wexner-backed effort to bring the CIA-linked Southern Air Transport to Columbus in the 1990s. Again, she's going to discuss that later in this article, too. Ultimately, the creation of the Columbus Partnership, or One Columbus, allowed him to both formalize and normalize arrangements like this that were once the product of backroom deals. And now they can just do it out in public. Here's a video. How long is this video? A minute and a half.
I think we have to acknowledge that the progress we've made in economic development in central Ohio is amazing. We're probably the fastest growing mid-sized city in the Midwest. That's a significant accomplishment. And we have the opportunity to accelerate our growth. I know the answer to the success that we've had is the Columbus way, a partnership, not only between the private sector and public, but amongst all the businesses and all the public leaders in the community. We're all in this together, and we each have something to contribute. I think the opportunity for us looking forward is to recognize how much momentum and positive results we've gained in such a short period of time. Momentum is a precious thing. With momentum, we can go from, the progress we've made to really accelerated growth. So it's not outside my imagination that we could have 5% growth in the community. Other communities have, and I think our foundation puts us at that, which means we've got to be wiser and smarter and take advantage of the progress we've made, because that will lead to future progress. We have the opportunity to go from good to really great. Wouldn't it be great if we were #1 in the United States?
This all sounds great. I mean, again, what do you think he's gonna do? So she continues again. This is Whitney Webb and Mark Goodwin at unlimitedhangout.com. You can see that I put the link to the article up there on screen. Go support them and go read the article there if you don't want to listen to me read the whole thing. The Wexner-dominated Columbus Partnership has also produced another affiliate organization. Go figure, because they don't create shell companies enough. Smart Columbus, which is focused on making Columbus a test city for other smart cities in the United States. Smart meaning 15-minute. Smart meaning it's all kind of linked together and monitored by cameras. Let's see. Smart Columbus is another public-private partnership between the Columbus Partnership and the city of Columbus. God, they love their public-private partnerships, don't they? One of its goals is to end the use of privately owned conventional cars in the city, replacing it with electric public transportation. You're literally not even going to be allowed to drive downtown. That's not great. The organization was created in 2016 after the city received a $50 million Department of Transportation grant to aid that effort, along with millions more from the family foundation of Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen. This goal is notably analogous to a goal promoted by the U.S. government's National Security Commission on AI, whose members included U.S. intelligence officials and representatives of big tech firms, including those which own major data centers in New Albany. Do you see how this is all starting to connect? Wexner's Columbus Partnership is also a network partner of an organization called Jobs Ohio. Jobs Ohio's other regional partners, which are 7, including the Columbus Partnership, are also public-private partnerships or private sector-led nonprofits, essentially modeled after the Columbus Partnership, but they focus on different areas of the state. As noted earlier, Jobs Ohio prepared the large incentives packages for the Intel New Albany deal, as well as the more recent Andrew. It's more organizations at the state level to funnel money to corporations for different specific vertical needs. And here she talks about Jobs Ohio. All right. And here's an Anduril deal discussed again later in a section of this article. Jobs Ohio is a very controversial organization. Created in 2011, it was the privatized replacement for the Ohio Department of Development that takes in money from what was once a public asset, Ohio's state liquor tax, which it leased the rights to through 2039 for $1.4 billion. Its lease was outrageously extended for another 14 years at no additional cost to Jobs Ohio by the Ohio Controlling Board last year. Why, when you were able to sell it for $1.4 billion for a certain block of time, would you then extend it for $0? Well, because they were greasing the skids, would be my guess. 4 years after it was created, it took in well over the $1.4 billion that it had paid for those rights. Those funds, which would have otherwise gone to fund the public sector, have ostensibly been spent on economic development, basically bribes to bring big corporations to the area. However, Jobs Ohio has been unable to produce data to back up its bold claims about job creation. It never is able to do that. While it's unknown how many jobs the group actually added, what has provably stacked up over the years are the group's known expenditures. And I'm guessing that she's got receipts for that. In addition, as a private corporation, Jobs Ohio is not required to show how the funds it takes in from the liquor tax are spent. So they take in public money because they pre-bought that money for $1.4 billion, though they've already taken in more than $1.4 billion. Right? But they still continue to get that money because they bought it up front at a discount. But it also oddly pardoned delinquent loans tied to a massive state bribery scandal. So see the next section of this article about that. And has been tied to other scandals, such as that involving former Ohio State University President Ted Carter. All right. I think that was just you, Naybones. I don't know if anybody else froze. Yes, no oversight. Exactly. All right. The large incentive packages of taxpayer money that Jobs Ohio has awarded to corporations ultimately come down to a large corporate welfare scheme that's directly financed by regular Ohioans and by the federal government, it sounds like. Currently, Jobs Ohio is chaired by a corporate lobbyist closely tied to current Ohio Governor Mike DeWine. Again, these guys are all in bed with each other. It's very incestuous. The problems with Jobs Ohio were succinctly summarized by the Ohio Capital Journal, which noted that shortly after Jobs Ohio was created, quote, the group Progress Ohio immediately sued, claiming that the Jobs Ohio scheme violated several provisions in the state constitution prohibiting the state government from giving special treatment to a single corporation, including by extending credit to it. But they did that anyway. The Ohio Supreme Court threw out the suit, saying those who brought it didn't have standing to sue because they didn't show they were personally harmed by the creation of Jobs Ohio. But wait, if you created an organization that competed with Jobs Ohio called Progress Ohio, wouldn't that have impacted you? Well, my guess would be Wexner was somehow influencing that judge. But I I don't know. I'm speculating. In a dissent, then Justice Bill O'Neill was appalled, as he should have been. Quote, hundreds of millions of dollars in public funds are being funneled into a dark hole to be dispersed without public scrutiny, and the highest court in the land is looking the other way? The Supreme Court of Ohio is the last house on the street, and passing on this case is an abdication of our duty as protectors of the Constitution. Yep. But they were ordered to do that, would be my guess, by a higher authority than the state constitution, sadly. Somebody who doesn't believe in state constitutions or state governments. Today, Jobs Ohio is another node in the latest iteration of the model first developed by Wexner and Kessler in that Columbus region, in New Albany. Corporate-controlled public-private partnerships in each region are now partnered with Jobs Ohio, which then funnels what was once public money with zero transparency into the hands of corporations doing business in the state. It's a little slush fund. And let me guess whether Les Wexner and his little buddies are going to get their little cut of every time. While these incentives are often framed as essential to creating jobs, research has actually shown that in about 3/4 of the cases, the incentives packages, like those developed by Jobs Ohio, would not have influenced the company's decision to settle or expand in the state. Maybe, except that the real influence was Les Wexner and maybe Epstein at the time. Jobs Ohio was notably created by legislation signed into law by former Governor John Kasich in 2011. That year, Kasich brought on VC financier Mark Kvamme to get Jobs Ohio off the ground. Kvamme was a veteran of Sequoia Capital, I know that name, before moving to Ohio to co-found the VC firm Drive Capital. Kvamme had donated over $1 million to Kasich's gubernatorial campaign prior to him choosing him to set up Jobs Ohio. They basically bought his way into a role like that, which then gives him all kinds of power and access to set himself up for further wealth. This guy was already super wealthy, though, as a VC. Kvamme's recent activities, including those directly linked to the New Albany company, are again discussed in detail in the next section. Man, there's a lot of sections left. All right, this is a thing about the creation of the Jobs Ohio board.
It's a panel of presidents and CEOs accustomed to being paid huge salaries and bonuses, but for their service on the board of Jobs Ohio, they will receive no financial compensation. Mark Kvamme, the venture capitalist from California, picked by the governor to head up the state's job creation efforts, will run the show. Kvamme and his wife contributed heavily to Kasich's campaign and Ohio Republican groups, giving just over $100,000 since 2008. James Boland, former CEO of the Cleveland Cavaliers, gave $22,000 to the Kasich campaign. Boland and C. Martin Harris, chief information officer for the Cleveland Clinic, worked with Kasich as board members for Invacare, a healthcare company based in Elyria. Critics say it's those kinds of connections that cause concern.
I think it really sort of raises the larger question that the public has been concerned about, and that much of the legislature has been concerned about, whether or not this isn't a pay-to-play kind of situation. And there's certainly reasons to be asking those questions in light of the connections that those appointments have to the governor and his campaign.
This is a really terrific board.
The governor dismisses such talk and says the expertise on the board shows how serious an effort this is.
Each one of them come with multiple different capabilities and experiences. What the governor really wanted was a diverse board, both from an experience perspective and from a regional perspective.
Others on the board include Gary Heminger, president of Marathon Petroleum, and Stephen Davis, CEO of Bob Evans. Both companies received millions of dollars worth of tax incentives from the state this year to stay in Ohio. The lone female on the board is Pamela Springer, president of Columbus-based Manta, an online platform for small businesses. State Representative Nancy Garland says the lack of more women on the board is a glaring mistake.
It's disappointing when you know all the well-qualified women out there that can do this job.
Well qualified. Sure. Okay. In addition to these donations from Kwame, the coffers of many of Kasich's political campaigns, as well as those of the state's Republican Party, have long been filled by Wexner, go figure, who's historically been the main political donor in the state for right-leaning politicians. However, Wexner, of course, also donates to Ohio Democrats. Why buy one side when you can buy them both? Kasich also received 35 gifts from Wexner in 2010, the year before he created Jobs Ohio with Kwame, but Kasich declined to disclose the nature of those gifts. That's also how? You're a public employee getting gifts from the richest political donor in the state, and you don't have to disclose? Okay. In addition to those ties, Kasich also tapped Wexner directly in 2013 to aid the state's marketing effort to businesses based elsewhere. Again, this is where he gets to get paid as marketing to lobby and to bring other businesses into the state. According to reports, Kasich compared asking Wexner for help in this effort to a quarterback getting advice from a Super Bowl champion, Peyton Manning. Oh, God almighty. I'm going to be sick. When asked about Wexner's ties to Epstein and why it had hampered Wexner's businesses in New Albany, Kasich responded that it was because New Albany operates at the speed of business. Okay, not that they just basically buried their connection to Epstein or anything. At the speed of business. Notably, a few years later in 2016, longtime Epstein associate Gwendolyn Beck emailed Epstein about joining Kasich's campaign as an advisor for a committee on aging. This clearly suggests that Epstein at the time still had a direct line to Kasich's campaign that year. It's also important to note that while Jobs Ohio rakes in billions in what was once Ohio public funds, and while Wexner greatly influences public spending on economic development, Ohio has been forced to drastically cut funding for public schools, libraries, publicly funded healthcare programs, and much more. The money's got to come from somewhere. They can't print their own money. They don't issue their own currency. Furthermore, many of the companies enticed to the state, and the Columbus region in particular, are data centers, which again have also been raising electricity costs across the state because they're driving up the per kilowatt hour price because of their usage. They've also been linked to serious health issues and noise issues. While Jobs Ohio would argue that these data centers create jobs, the vast majority of the jobs they do create are temporary, as they are construction jobs that predictably disappear once a data center is built. You don't need much more construction once you've built the thing. Public outrage against data centers have grown in the state and around the country as a result, with the state legislature recently voting to end some of the state subsidies that help Wexner's New Albany and other areas in the state court them. As they should. These are all for-profit corporations. Why do you need them in your area draining your resources? Well, because Wexner has other businesses, ancillary businesses, that can profit from all these other businesses being here. Despite this legislation passing, Governor Mike DeWine recently used a line item veto to quietly allow these subsidies to continue. All right, so even though the state legislature passed that they don't want to continue to fund this, the governor just slipped it under the radar. And maybe that's because of his relationship with Wexner. I'm sure it can't hurt. All right. Innovate Ohio and the Ohio Fund. We've got yet another shell company. As Kasich was leaving the governor's office in January 2019, he signed off on the creation of a new government agency called Innovate Ohio. His successor, Mike DeWine, and his lieutenant governor, John Husted, both of whom have been heavily funded by Wexner, go figure, oversaw the agency's efforts to modernize the state of Ohio's public services. Let me guess, did they get any contracts with Palantir? I'm guessing so. Not unlike the pitches for Jobs Ohio and related groups, retooling of Ohio public services to be as digital focused as possible was deemed necessary in order to make the state attractive to outside business. In April 2019, Mike DeWine issued an order forcing all state agencies, boards, and commissions to adopt and use Innovate Ohio. Wow. Again, completely corrupt because Innovate Ohio was appointed by Wexner-friendly people. The initial board of Innovate Ohio included Mark Kwame, who helped create Jobs Ohio, as well as Ohio businessman turned Ohio Senator Bernie Moreno, he owned car dealerships, and venture capitalist and current VP J.D. Vance, who we know has connections to Thiel. Moreno's campaign, financed in part by, go figure, Wexner, was notably dogged by accusations that he used his position on the board at Innovate Ohio to boost a blockchain company in which he had a large stake. Other notable founding members of the board at Innovate Ohio include the head of U.S. intelligence and defense contractor Battelle, whose Columbus area facility was the alleged source of the anthrax used in the 2001 attacks. Remember that? The anthrax that was sent to Congress people and people in D.C. and NBC News, I believe, in New York. Vivek Ramaswamy, we talked about him earlier, currently now running to be the new governor of Ohio after DeWine, because these parasites never go away. They just continue to resurface. He's also joined the board of Innovate Ohio after its founding. Remember that he's got deep ties with Thiel, and he's also, I believe, a shareholder in Rumble, so he's got ties to Vance through Rumble through that as well. As part of its mandate, Innovate Ohio laid the infrastructure for and then established digital identity via the OHID system for every Ohioan hoping to access state public services. So that's like the real ID stuff. Innovate Ohio's advisory board is currently chaired by Fallon Donahue, who co-founded Narya Capital with J.D. Vance and former Mithril Capital partner Colin Greenspan. Mithril is closely linked to tech billionaire Peter Thiel. Again, that name keeps resurfacing, whose deep ties to Epstein have been further illuminated by recent releases. Vance is also a Mithril alum, and Thiel played a pivotal role in launching his political career. Narya has invested heavily in Vivek Ramaswamy's Strive Asset Management, which has also received funding from Cantor Fitzgerald. We've talked about him before, or them, whose longtime head, Howard Lutnick, or Nutlick, is currently the Commerce Secretary under Trump. He also runs Tether. Lutnick's sons are currently running Cantor in his absence, but I'm sure a phone call from daddy to sons can get whatever really he wants. But we'll see. I thought Boner was in South Carolina. I don't think he's South Carolina. I thought Boehner was in Ohio. As previously noted, venture capitalist Mark Kwame was central not only to the creation of Jobs Ohio, but also to the early years of Innovate Ohio. Prior to moving to Ohio, while at Sequoia, Kwame was one of the earliest backers and board members of Reid Hoffman's LinkedIn and has invested alongside Hoffman in other companies. Hoffman has since become infamous for his ties to Epstein and the Democratic Party. Remember, I believe he funded the Shadow app back in 2020. The firm that Kwame co-founded in Ohio, Drive Capital, received that $50 million grant from Ohio State University for one of its funds. Reports suggested the controversial decision to put so much of Ohio State funds into Drive Capital was related to Kwame's ties to Kasich as well as John G. At the time, G was serving as a member of Ohio State's Board of Trustees, while also serving as a director of Wexner's The Limited. No way. Yet another link to Wexner. He also had taken Wexner's spot on the board that when Wexner stepped down himself in 2012. So now you've got somebody like a loyalist, a compatriot, okay, a legacy who's going to continue along the same lines. Ohio State is also heavily funded by Wexner family donations. His name's all over the state. In addition, Kwame sat on the board of the Wexner Center for the Arts, which is chaired by none other than Les Wexner. Are we getting a pattern here? There's Reid Hoffman and Mark Kwame in front of the stock exchange the day LinkedIn went public. LinkedIn was, by the way, went up to a couple of $100 a share and then was acquired by Microsoft. So Reid Hoffman then cashed out and made $1 gazillion. Kwame has since developed what he refers to as Ohio's own sovereign wealth fund, modeled after Singapore's state-owned investment company, Temasek. That fund, called the OHIO, how fitting, the Ohio High Growth Investment Opportunities Fund, has raised hundreds of millions of dollars from Ohio-based investors whose identities have not been disclosed by the fund. The fund does have an advisory board of several prominent Ohio businessmen, each from a major Ohio city. So she's going to talk about, notably, the businessman chosen by the fund to represent Columbus is Alex Fisher. Let me guess whether he's going to be Wexner connected. Former CEO and president of the Wexner-founded Columbus Partnership, who's currently a partner at Wexner's New Albany company. Naturally. Notably, the Ohio Fund has backed a recently approved New Albany development called the New Albany Innovation Center that's marked by Wexner's New Albany company as one of the key incentives for businesses considering moving to the Columbus suburb that he largely controls. In addition, the Ohio Fund's first big investment was the purchase of a large 148-acre property roughly 12 miles away from New Albany in Sunbury, Ohio. Are we watching the Israelization of Sunbury, where they're going to basically expand New Albany there? Or they'll just have another zip code that they can funnel other kinds of stuff through and create different laws to go back and forth and different rules. Who knows? The property is part of the Sunbury Business and Technology Park, right? Sunbury Business and Technology Park, soon to be home to a massive $2 billion Amazon data center, is being developed by, you guessed it, Wexner's New Albany company. This is really unbelievable. This guy's got his hands in every single thing. The Ohio Fund has also contributed significant sums to Narya Capital, the VC firm also co-founded by J.D. Vance. Kwame, who created the fund, has been a major fundraiser for Vance's political campaigns. Kwame, importantly, also has his own political ambitions, so watch for him to run for some kind of political office in the future. That isn't the only investment that the Ohio Fund has made with ties to the current Trump administration alone. The fund recently teamed up with Terry Coyne, who was recent chairman of the Cleveland office of Newmark, to find the next Anduril to fill a large property near Columbus's Rickenbacker Airport. Newmark's recent acquisition of this land near Rickenbacker neighbors the site chosen for military contractor Anderill's planned large drone factory. Again, later discussed in this article. Probably going to have to suspend this at some point. Andurill was created by two figures close to Peter Thiel, as well as J.D. Vance, Palmer Luckey, and Trey Stevens. The Ohio Fund is the only member of the group of investors behind Coin that Coin has chosen to disclose. I'm guessing that Wexner and other individuals are also behind him, but they don't need to disclose that. Okay, so Newmark, again, that's this guy, this company that Terry was the vice chairman for. Newmark owns the land in question and employs Coin. Newmark is a subsidiary of Cantor Fitzgerald, which also has a ton of shell and holding companies, by the way. The New York Times recently reported on how the Lutnick family and Cantor have been cashing in on AI data centers around the country, with the Columbus region apparently being no exception. Why would it be? Because they're very closely tied with Thiel and J.D. Vance and Ramaswamy. Lutnick was very close to Wexner's former money manager Epstein, who was Lutnick's longtime neighbor and also his business partner. Epstein also hosted Lutnick at his infamous island, as well as the family. All right. I'm gonna cut this article off here. This has been one of the longest reads I've done at 90 minutes. And this is part one. I'm going to come back and read part two next week. I think we're about halfway through. So, yeah, thank you for hanging out for that. Let me see just how much we have left here. There's a substantial amount. Yeah. We'll come back next week and we'll read the other half of this. And we'll probably do another hour and a half just on that. Because I still actually do have a bunch of other stuff I wanted to talk about tonight. All right. But we're gonna shelve it for tonight and we'll come back and do the other half. All right. I hope everyone appreciates that. That I'm calling that for now. Thank you, Golden Monarch. Appreciate you. Your voice would be shot. Well, I've been taking a drink here or there. I try it. It is a lot of info to absorb also. All right. But it's really like it is a fire hose of information to absorb. But basically what you've got is that Wexner is involved in all of these shell companies that are involved in developing the area, in selling the land, in bringing companies to the area, and in getting grant money to be able to fund the bribery that it's taking to bring them into the Columbus area. That's where we're at so far. Support independent media like this. Again, support Unlimited Hangout because Whitney and Mark are unbelievable. But if you want to support INN, the ways to do that, Cash App, $, Indie News Network, co-fi.com/Indie News Network, paypal.me/Indie News Network, at patreon.com/Indie News Network, at IndieNewsNow.com. That's the website that I built that aggregates over 100 sources, that runs 24/7, completely ad-free, and you can get linked to articles like the one I just read for an hour and a half, and a ton of others, again, running 24/7. Also at IndieMediaToday.com, where we're live on Substack, and at INNNewsletter.com, where we publish a weekly update of all the activity from Indie News Network, which is I am a co-founder of. Support independent media because we need it more than ever. All right. I love you all, and we'll see you next Tuesday. No! We just fucking lost the stream!
I guess this isn't such an awful place. Is that what you want me to say?